This is going to be a part two to my original video talking about how the liberals' policies prevent children from getting an education. Now, in my original premise, I was making the point that the law says everyone has a right to a free and public education. And how does this policy prevent kids from getting an education? It's the liberals' interpretation of this policy that prevents kids from getting an education. Now, the liberal will say that the in every classroom there's usually about two or three disruptive kids, and you can't. And the liberal will come in and say you can't remove them or you can't discipline them because they have a right to a free and public education. Now, in his attempts to enforce rights for these three or four dysfunctional kids, it infringes on the rights of the other 12 to 13 responsible children. And it prevents them from getting a free public education because as long as this disruptive individual is in the classroom wreaking havoc, all the attention is focused on trying to nowadays deal with them. Because back in the day, when I was in school, they used to discipline these type of kids, but nowadays the entire day in the classroom is spent trying to manage these children, and that really prevents all the other kids from getting their right to a free public education. And what happens is these disruptive kids pretty much take over the classroom, and they pretty much prevent every kid from getting their right to a free and public education. They really literally infringe on the rights of others because no one wants to make them take responsibility at all. And this process starts all the way in kindergarten and first grade. You have these disruptive, troubled kids. They come into the classroom, they're acting out, they're hitting the teacher, they're getting violent with other kids, they're throwing things. And the whole thing is that because the liberal comes in with his policy saying that, he has a right to a free and public education, no one can do anything to fix the classroom and make it where it's a environment that's conducive to learning so the other 12 to 13 kids can get their right to a free public education. Um, Nowadays, what happens now, because I had a family member two family members who work in education. One works on the college level, another works in the elementary school level. And they were telling me, there isn't much you can do about the classroom with disruptive children. The family member who works on the um, elementary level is telling me that the policies created by these liberals um, tell you that you can't discipline these children, you can't suspend them, and the interpretation of suspension, the newer interpretation of suspension is that the child is taken out of the classroom and they have to go to another person's classroom, and they have to do their set 5 to 7 days in another person's classroom because the liberal believes that by taking them out of the classroom and making them stay with their mother or father or both of their parents, they are preventing them from having a right to a free and public education. Again, really a dysfunctional policy. And the new policy that's coming up next year will be you cannot suspend them at all, and that you cannot discipline these disruptive children at all. And that type of policy, that liberal policy, is going to turn your public school basically into a zoo. And because if you have an environment where disruptive individuals are allowed to just take it over, and I've seen this because I went to a junior high school back in the 80s called IS 148, and pretty much the inmates were running the asylum, you're not going to be able to teach anyone. So this policy really prevents people from having their right to a free and public education, this liberal interpretation of policy. Because again, with rights comes responsibilities, and you have a right to a free and public education if you take responsibility for it. And this is something that is not being drilled into people as early as 5 and 6 years old these days, because the liberals' interpretation of the policy is, again, it's based on an entitlement mindset not based on you have to earn things in order to get them. And this interpretation of the policy is going to lead to, chaos in the classroom. And many people just don't understand how bad it is unless you are, a teacher, or other teachers, and you're working with these policies, and you're working with these disruptive kids, and you're seeing how they are infringing on the rights of others, because the liberals' interpretation of policy is teaching them a sense of entitlement and a view that, I can get whatever I want, whenever I want, and however I want. What we're doing with these policies, the liberals teaching with these policies, is a social education that's going to be extremely dysfunctional to these kids 5, 10, 15 years from now when they become adults, and they're going to walk into a world where they're going to walk into the world with these self-entitlement issues, and they're going to come in for, again, a rude awakening, because people are not going to pacify you on jobs or in other social situations like they do in your public school system, where they've gotten this sense of entitlement thanks to these liberal policies, which is, no discipline, um, and your rights are put above the rights of others. And this is what happens in your public schools. The rights of these disruptive children are put above the rights of the regular kids, and they're not able to get that free public education that they're supposed to get from your public schools. And this is a policy that really needs to be challenged, this interpretation of the policy, because again, everyone has the right to a free and public education, but there has to be a tenet of responsibility attached to it. Because once you attach the tenet of responsibility to it, then you can create an environment where everybody can learn. Because as long as the disruptive individual's needs are put above the needs of others, it's like putting the needs of the few above the needs of the many, and the many wind up losing in the end, and then all of society really winds up losing in the end, because children wind up socialized with a dysfunctional way of thinking. Um, your public schools really, this is one of the policies that the liberal has created that has brought havoc to your public schools, and will eventually really bring havoc um, higher up down the road when these kids start getting older, especially in the junior high and high school levels, when these kids are like 6 feet tall, and some of these males weighing 200, 250 pounds. Because I've seen this back in the day when it was pretty bad back in the late 80s. People just wandering the halls, just walking around just because they feel like it. Because right now, my family member was telling me that, these kids are 5 and 6 years old, and they just decide to get up and walk out of the classroom. There's nothing the teacher can do about it, because the policy that is established by places like your New York City Department of Education pretty much tell them that they can't touch them, they can't engage them, and there's no way to enforce discipline. And these policies really are detrimental to the growth of children. Now, there's another policy I want to get into, another liberal policy I want to talk about, and that's this new inclusive policy. And what these liberals have come up with is everybody has to be in the same classroom. They don't want special education anymore, because a lot of people, back in the day used to abuse special education, especially white female teachers, when it came down to black males. Instead of trying to help focus on a discipline issue, they fast tracked many black males to special education and put them on psychotropic drugs. Now, the new policy is now, thanks to that dysfunctional, ideology from liberals from a previous generation, and racists from a previous generation, is to put all of the special ed kids in with regular children, and that includes children with mental retardation, children with Down syndrome, and children with mental health disorders. They really want to put them all in the same classroom, because some of these liberals believe that they believe that if you include all the kids, everybody will learn. The handicapped kids will learn, or mentally disabled kids. Don't want to offend some of these people out here, but they believe that the mentally disabled kids will learn from the regular kids. Now, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen, and this is a recipe for disaster. I mean, on the elementary level, you just have people just sitting in a classroom. But once you get to the junior high, middle school, and high school level, you get a whole recipe for lawsuits waiting to happen, because when you have mentally disabled children with Down syndrome or mental retardation or, mental health issues in a classroom with regular kids, it's going to be total anarchy because what's going to happen is you're going to have um, situations that are going to set themselves up like rapes in bathrooms, sexual assaults in bathrooms, robberies, beatings, because kids are cruel. And this is something that, these liberals just don't understand that when you put, weak people or people who cannot defend themselves in environments with really predators, especially in your public middle schools and high schools, you put predators around victims, they automatically become targets for these predators. And this is just an environment that is opening itself up to lawsuits. And I see just a disaster by this policy because these liberal policies like this, you're going to include everybody because you don't want to pay for special education, you don't want to pay for special services, is going to wind up costing places like your New York City Department of Education twice as much money because all it takes is for you to get 5, 10, 15 lawsuits, and the policy is just gonna cost more than it actually would to just separate the kids from classrooms in different classrooms because special education, when it's done right, really does help educate people. But it's this again, this liberal interpretation of the policy that again will deny people their right to a free and public education because again, when you mix people with learning disabilities into a classroom with people who don't have them, again, it's a recipe for disaster, and it again infringes on the rights of both groups to get their free and public education. And these policies, again, created by your liberals, are the big problem. Um, that is going to they're a big problem, and they're preventing kids from getting their education. And what happens is they go into some of them, if they do survive and manage to get to the college level, they come in with a self entitlement issue, and they start believing that they can still pull the same games that they did in high school and junior high school. Being disruptive, acting out, um, coming in whenever they feel like coming in late. They believe they can still pull these type of behaviors and participate in these type of behaviors on the college level. And again, once you become an adult, the world is a completely different place, and a lot of these are in for a rude awakening because in the adult world, you have to be responsible. And this is why it's important to teach kids responsibility from an early age because the earlier they learn how to be responsible for themselves, the easier it is for them to transition into taking responsibility for themselves when they become adults. And that's not happening due to the liberal and his dysfunctional policies regarding public education. Again, he's promoting an idea of self entitlement and the idea that everybody has a right to a free public education, but no one has to take responsibility for themselves and, more importantly, responsibility for others. And that's going to lead, to a society that's going to become eventually more dysfunctional. This is why, you see adults who are having meltdowns because the policies created in public education reinforce, the dysfunction in many households and the dysfunctional ones. And the whole thing is that those dysfunctional behaviors oftentimes wind up trickling down, especially in the classroom, because my family member has told me this on both of them have told me this on both ends because this disruptive individual is getting all the attention, and again, the other kids who are just doing what they're supposed to do in the classroom, they're not getting any positive reinforcement. This dysfunctional person is getting all the positive reinforcement, but they're the ones being ignored and being made to feel invisible and made to feel like, what are they doing wrong when they're really doing everything right? And we really have to positively reinforce those kids who are doing well. And it's hard to do that because of these one or two disruptive individuals. And even in some cases, their parents, because the parents, when you try to deal with them, will come in and try to use this liberal interpretation of a right to a free and public education to trample on the rights of others, because this has happened many times. They will come into the classroom talking about, my child has a right to a free and public education, this is the law, and really, the other ones, ironically, are the ones stepping on the rights of others, because, again, the child has a right to a free and public education under a, objective interpretation of the policy, but they have a responsibility to be on time, one, act responsibly in class, and to bring in all their work and assignments on time. Once you do those three things, then you have your right to your free and public education, but you just don't get it by showing up. And this is the entitlement mindset that has been put in place by these liberal policies and these liberal politicians and these liberal education administrators. And I believe personally that this policy really has to change, because it's not producing the quality workers that can build a strong America. What's happening is you're getting a lot of people coming into the workplace with a lot of self-entitlement issues. They believe that they can come into another person's business and do things the way they want to do, and they believe that they can come in, and act out and get crazy because somebody just told them to do something such as simple as, mopping a floor, or taking a break. Not when they usually just asking them to take a break earlier than was expected. And this is the type of meltdowns that you see, where somebody who just they're bad at following directions, they're bad at communication, and this is what you get when you have these policies that put one disruptive group above that of another group, because these people feel that they're going to be coddled by bosses and stuff. And this does not happen in the real world. This is what happens is these people, in a lot of cases, they either disrupt the business or they wind up getting fired. And that also slows down productivity, because then that same employer now has to go look for another person and then spend even more time training this individual and trying to prepare them to keep the business going. And all this is because a lot of people don't think in a panoramic view or a long-term picture, and they don't think about how these liberal policies are doing damage to education, and how that education, that dysfunctional education that these kids are getting, not only academically but socially, is affecting the overall outcome of the worker of the future, because all of this is all trickling down, and it's all leading to a much bigger picture. And a lot of people don't think about big pictures. All they think about is a small picture, and you really have to focus on that bigger picture and how everybody's role relates to it. And this is something that's not being done because of these liberal policies. Again, they just think right to a free and public education is an entitlement. No, a right comes with responsibility. That's how societies are all made, that everybody has a right to things, but they also have to take responsibility in order to make sure that not only do they protect their own rights, but the rights of others. Now, that's all I have to say for this video. I have a lot of great books on Amazon.com. Many of the ebooks are on Kindle Unlimited, so you can borrow them for free if you have Amazon Prime. Many of the ebooks in my catalog are just for 99 cents, so there's lots of great reading there, a lot of great positive, inspiring stories. Yeah, again, that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.